Pro team mechanics have a near endless supply of parts, tools and equipment to help make professional cyclists as fast as possible. But just because you've seen a pro mechanic do something doesn't necessarily mean you should too. So coming up are 5 examples when you shouldn't copy a pro mechanic. First up, have you ever seen those speedy fast wheel changes that pro mechanics will do in races? Well, it looks like they're using a drill, but it is in fact a wheel gun designed to remove the through axle and reinstall it as fast as possible. Now, while this is great for a pro mechanic in a race when speed is everything, for you or I, it's not really that important. But the big thing is here, if we were to use that, we would run the risk of cross-threading the through axle and damaging the through axle and our frame. We just quite simply don't need to use it. So stick to the usual methods and using an Allen or a hex key. And better yet, if you've got a rim brake bike, you won't even have to use that. Next up, torque wrenches. Now, it's not all that often you'll see pro team mechanics using a torque wrench. They've spent years and years working on the bikes. They understand exactly how tight every single bolt needs to be. And further to that, if they were to use a torque wrench and torque up every single bolt, well, they'd be there forever spending all their time. And plus, they do sometimes go over the manufacturer's specified torque limit, which is fine for them because if they damage your breaker component, they simply just replace it with one of the many or hundreds of spares that they carry. However, for you and I, if we were to do that, well, it could result in a trip to our local bike shop to spend our hard-earned cash and buy a replacement part. Almost every time a pro rides their bike, the mechanics will wash them off with a jet wash and some soapy water. Well, the bikes, that is, not the riders themselves. However, that's great for having a shiny bike all the time, but if you and I were to take that approach and jet wash our bikes, even if it's just a bit dusty, well, we run the risk of blasting out all the oil and grease out of some of the key components of our bikes. And that could mean that we're having to do premature service work on our bike, replacing components sooner than we otherwise would have done. But that's fine for the pro team mechanic because they're going to replace lots of those components regularly anyway, just for peace of mind. But for you and I, it's just going to mean more work and more cost. Speaking of washing grease out of components, an old pro mechanics trick is to have a bearing, not quite as large as this, but one that's in a wheel, for example, or a bottom bracket, and they'll take the grease out of that component and then replace it with a thinner oil, for example. That'll help make the bearing spin as fast as possible, which is great for the pro riders because it offers them a slight speed advantage. And in some instances, they'll also remove the seals completely from those bearings, which is great to reduce the friction as much as possible. But for you and I, all it's really going to mean is that we have to service and replace all of the bearings on our components after every single wet ride, which is a great expense and a great amount of time that we don't have to spare. And it is a marginal gain, so let's face it, for people like me, it's going to make absolutely no difference to my Sunday group ride. And finally, something I'll often see pro mechanics do after washing the bikes is blasting them off with compressed air. Whilst this does speed up the drying process and make life a lot easier for them, it's not necessarily going to be great for you and I. Because they've got 15 bikes to do, they need to be nice and fast. But for people like me, we just run the risk of blasting water inside our bearings and past some of the oil and dirt seals, which is going to mean our parts wear out and need replacing much sooner than they otherwise would have done. So there you have it, 5 reasons not to copy pro team mechanics. And if you have any tips of your own, let us know in the comments section down below. And remember, subscribe to GCN Tech for more helpful maintenance videos like this. See ya.